With all due respect to everyone involved in this hearing, I would like to say at the outset that this is not the hearing on Brazil that I believe we should be having today. The hearing I believe we should be having is one focused on the 200th anniversary this year of the bilateral relationship between the United States and Brazil, the two largest democracies in the Western Hemisphere. The hearing I believe we should be having is one focused on the many areas of cooperation between our two countries, on labor and workers' rights, climate and protecting the Amazon, combating hunger, poverty, and violence, and expanding sustainable and broad-based economic growth, stability, security, and peace throughout the hemisphere. Above all, we should be working to advance our critical partnership with Brazil in a spirit of mutual respect. Unfortunately, the framing of this hearing, which I believe presents a distorted view of Brazilian democracy and provides a platform to those seeking to undermine it, does the opposite of that. Rather than strengthening our relationship, a hearing like this serves only to damage and undermine it. Brazil is a strong and vibrant democracy with a robust civil society and media, a multitude of political parties representing a huge political spectrum, and an electoral system that is rightly considered to be one of the most secure and rapid in the world. Like all democracies, including right here in the United States, there are healthy debates to be had about aspects of the country's institutions. But I want to be clear. Internal politics and debates on constitutional and legal issues should be decided by the Brazilian people, their elected representatives, and Brazil's judiciary. The United States Congress is not the forum for it. We can and should continue to find areas for cooperation and mutual advancement, but we should not and cannot act as if we somehow have a mandate to weigh in on the internal mechanisms of Brazil's institutions. Democracies are different, each informed by their own history. Brazil's 1988 constitution was shaped by a military dictatorship that usurped power through a military coup and brutally ruled the country from 1964 to 1985. Many of the people who lived through these horrific years still remember state-led extrajudicial killings, disappearances, and torture. Brazil's democracy responded by providing courts with the mandate to protect its hard-won democracy and prevent authoritarianism from taking root again. What we will hear today from some witnesses is an attempt to undermine Brazil's judicial process. Former President Bolsonaro's conduct in office, his praise for the military dictatorship, his calls for violence against his political opponents, his refusal to acknowledge his 2022 election loss, his attempt to engineer a coup, and his incitement of the January 8th attacks triggered laws in place designed to serve as a check on executive power resulting from the coup in 1964. Brazilian law enforcement and judiciary have refused to stand by idly in response to the most serious threat to Brazil's democracy since the military dictatorship. They have responded robustly, according to their constitution and their legal system, which again have key differences with ours in the United States. Brazil, like France, Germany, and other Western European countries whose democratic credentials would likely not be questioned by anyone in this room, has a different conception of freedom of speech than we have here in the United States. Brazil's approach to freedom of speech, while broad, includes guardrails informed by this recent history. The title of today's hearing is Brazil, a Crisis of Democracy, Freedom, and Rule of Law. Mr. Chairman, respectfully, I would ask, where was the hearing about Brazilian democracy when we learned about then-President Bolsonaro's efforts to foment a military coup? Where was the hearing after supporters of former President Bolsonaro led a coordinated attempt to overthrow the country's democracy on January 8th, 2023?
You know, strengthening democracy should be a top priority of the U.S.-Brazil relationship, which is very long, especially given our country's shared experience with horrific attacks on our democratic institutions that were stoked by defeated, thin-skinned presidents seeking to reject the peaceful transition of power. In the United States, insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol on January 6th in an attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 elections by force, killing people, including members of law enforcement. 2 years later, Jair Bolsonaro and his far-right supporters took inspiration from Trump's election denial playbook and sought to orchestrate a military takeover, busing in protesters to storm all three branches of Brazil's government on January 8th. These attacks and the disinformation and conspiracy theories that enabled them represent the very real threats to democracy that we should be discussing. I did visit Brazil. I just came back from Brazil. I was actually there when videotape was revealed and shared of then President Bolsonaro hiding out in the Hungarian embassy. So I just returned, my time. I just returned from leading a delegation of Congressional Black Caucus members to Brazil to learn about our shared histories of racial discrimination. And if we want to talk about strengthening democracy, we should be talking about how we can increase the political participation and economic and social inclusion of Afro-Brazilians who have been murdered and marginalized throughout Brazil's history. And let's shine a light on the historic land grabs and religious persecutions that these communities have continued to face. So instead, this hearing is about protecting Brazil's democracy, but really, it's actually an attempt to undermine it by interfering in Brazil's judicial process and giving a platform to the very individuals who spread lies about Brazil's election. Not only that, the far right in the United States is using the debate around Brazil's fight against disinformation as an opportunity to cry victim when they face accountability for their own anti-democratic actions and to give themselves cover for their enabling of the January 6th insurrection. So if that is not the definition of gaslighting, I don't know what is.
Poder Monitor. Acesse agora e ganhe 30 dias grátis.